In this video, you will learn how to play the SCOTCH GAMBIT. The SCOTCH GAMBIT is connected to the SCOTCH opening. The SCOTCH game has been around since 1750. It got its name from a correspondent match between the London Chess Club and the Edinburgh Chess Club in Scotland. The Edinburgh players used the opening to win the match and give the opening its name. The SCOTCH opening has a lot of traps for both white and black side. This opening starts with pawn to e4, e5 by black, knight to f3, attacking the pawn in the center. There are many ways that black can defend this pawn. Among all, it chooses knight to c6. In this position, white throws the pawn to the heart of the board. This is where Gambit gets to join the name of the opening, SCOTCH Gambit. In this position, if black takes, there are many open advantages for white. From here, you will notice that white has attained rapid development. The pawn in the center has access to these squares in the center, respectively d5 and f5. The light square bishop can easily be developed to any of these available squares here. The dark square bishop can also be developed to any of these squares. Then this white queen has mobility than the black queen. In no time, if white decides to develop the bishop to c4, he can castle the king faster than black. These are just few advantages mentioned for the sake of learning in this video in the SCOTCH Gambit. There are lots of continuation here for white. Since white's intention is not to capture the pawn on d4 right away, white can choose to continue with c3, bishop to c4, knight to g5, and knight takes the pawn on d4. Let's explore knight to g5, because this is where beginners will start with. In this case, the knight comes to this square to harass f7. This knight cannot be captured by the queen because the knight is well defended by the bishop. A move that may likely to happen here is pawn over to h6, attacking that knight. In this position, just pick up the pawn on f7, attacking the queen and the rook. Here, king has to take that knight. If not, one of these strong pieces will be captured by the knight. So king takes, unleash bishop to c4, check. These are the open possibilities in the SCOTCH Gambit. King can actually go over to e7, but something will go wrong here if king goes back to e8. Unleash queen to h5 will check. Blocking does not solve any problem in this situation. So king to e7 may be likely played in this position. Just storm into that 7th rank with queen to f7 will check. King goes to d6. Just imagine how the minor pieces come in by bringing bishop to f4 with check, harassing the king. There are two possible moves here. King can either run away or block with the knight. Blocking with the knight is a mistake that instantly gives white a room to play queen d5 check. King moves, then taking the knight on e5 leads to checkmate. So if we go back to this position, let's explore king running to c5. Then queen to d5 check comes up. If the king goes to this square, queen to b5 is checkmate. Likewise, if the king goes up, queen to b5 is still checkmate. We've just explored attacking chances and winning possibility with knight moving over to g5. Let's take a look at another aggressive move, bishop to c4. Since we are playing for attack after giving up pawn in the center, the attention in this position is now centered towards the f7 square. In no time or in the future, knight will be played here to harass this particular square because bishop is already there. Queen will use this square or h5. Many ideas comes up while playing the SCOTCH Gambit. In search for continuation, black has many choices here. In many games, black has chosen to play this move, bishop over to this square, bishop to this square. For the sake of this particular variation, let's stick to bishop to b4 check. Bishop to b4 check has come in to harass your king. In a fast response, you might blunder by playing knight. Pawn will just take and you are losing material in this position. Why not surprise black by playing this move, c3? Although we are attacking the bishop, pawn can still take that pawn. Just right away take back with the pawn, not with the knight. This move in turn attacks that bishop. The bishop has squares to go to. Bishop can be moved to this square, either here, here, or even back home. Let's take a look at one, which is bishop to e7. Then we can unleash queen to d5, supporting the bishop to place pressure on f7 to make checkmate. If black tries to hold on by developing the knight, just eliminate the knight with the bishop. If pawn takes, queen takes the pawn there on f7 is checkmate. However, after eliminating that knight, some experienced player want to stick up to playing the game from here by castling the short side. Well, an advice from me to you: exchange a lot of pieces as much as possible. Bishop takes, queen takes, then knight takes. I believe from here you can win the game onward. We just looked at moving the bishop back to this square and how it cost black the game. Let's talk about moving the bishop back to c5. In this case, we cannot unleash this move because queen to e7 solves all the problems, defending both the bishop and defending f7 square. So we have a variation here that still creates chaos in black's territory. What we have to do is sacrifice this bishop, and we have a compensation after king takes the bishop. In this case, the king has lost the castling right. Secondly, the king is exposed to queen to d5 check right away. In this form, if the king goes back to e8, then we can grab that bishop we give out, having more advantage, such that our king here can be castled faster and sought for king safety, develop the piece minorly, introduce the bishop, and so on and so forth. We have looked at this continuation where the bishop moves from the starting position to b4, giving a check to the king. We have seen some variations that punish that move. However, let's go with an idea where an experienced player would sort for a different approach with bishop to c5 instead. We can catch black unaware by dropping a second pawn, c3. Because black wants to retain the extra pawn advantage, it takes the pawn in a hurry. We can just repeat that last variation by sacrificing this bishop. We have seen a lot of compensation in this position. However, we're going to tweak this variation a little by playing this queen to d5 check. In this position here, if king goes back to e8, instead of taking this particular bishop right away, we can just throw up a sneaky queen to h5 check. In this position here, the king cannot go to any of these dark squares because we are still going to unleash taking this particular bishop with check. Well, let's consider an inferior move with pawn to g6, attacking the queen. Now we can now take the bishop. After taking the bishop, we now aim to capture this particular pawn back with the queen. So what you may see black playing in this position is taking our pawn. We can now develop the bishop after taking that pawn on b2, attacking that rook via this long diagonal. How impressive. A way to stop we from taking that rook is by playing knight. And this move temporarily blocks us from taking the rook, and that knight is defended by the queen. However, we can increase pressure on that particular knight by playing queen to this square or bringing our queen here and so on. Well, in this position, I would advise you to castle if you get to this kind of position, keeping the king away from the center. A move like knight takes the pawn will only fail because there is rook here coming to attack that knight. Then this particular rook is falling in the future. So that idea may not be tried by black. Well, what can black play here? Black could try d6, trying to kick the queen. We still have a move like this, which is logically okay. Well, I will consider you playing queen to c4 because we don't have a light squared bishop at the moment. Putting the queen on the light squares can help you reach more squares on the board. To unpin, black might play rook to f8. Just go on with rook to e1, supporting and defending the center. Black may see that some of his pieces are inactive at the moment, which includes the rook and the light squared bishop. So if he develops the 9 square bishop to g4, this is actually a kind of inaccuracy which you can punish by a simple attacking move, e5. Check this out. If bishop takes, then there's a trouble with this variation. After pawn takes the knight first, this comes with a discover check from the rook. This square is covered by the queen through this diagonal. The pawn covers here. The king can actually run and the knight can block. Let's say if the knight block instead, we go with this move, check to the king. Queen takes the rook, we take, and this variation is simply winning for white. Aside from that, if black tries to run away with moving the king to his square, can you see queen to e6? That is an absolute checkmate. Let's consider other variations such as where pawn takes, just take with the knight. Knight takes, we can take with the bishop. In this position, we are threatening a lot of nasty discoveries. Look at this rook is very powerful in this position, giving an extra attack on the king. Then we are threatening to take the knight in the next move and take the queen with an open discovery. I believe this position here gives you an insight of how powerful the Scotch gambit is. In this position, there are different approaches black can choose to take after we play pawn to c3. In this case, black may choose not to take the pawn and decide to play knight to f6 instead. We can launch an aggressive e5 attacking the knight. In this position, if the knight goes to e4, white can simply castle to safety. Once black castles, then we can unleash bishop to d5, which attacks the knight here on e4, and suddenly the knight has nowhere to go. In this position, if black decides to change approach and not castle right away by playing a move like this, we can simply take this pawn en passant. Here, knight takes that particular pawn and keep the knight safe. In this position, we can simply throw a sneaky rook to e1 check first. How do you block this? Queen should not block because queen blocks, the queen is gone. So, knight to e7 might be the likely move to be played in this position. Here, our bishop is under attack. So, bishop to b3 is okay. Instead of bishop to d3, we want to still put eye on this long diagonal on f7. Here, pawn takes the pawn on c3. Knight takes, bringing the knight to the game. Black now decides to castle and keep his king away from the center. Bishop to g5 is a good way to continue. Check this out. This knight is now pinned to the queen. Attack twice such that the rook attacks the knight, the bishop attacks the knight. There is no move like this because the pawn is pinned to the king. How to defend? We're going to study two responses in this position. Let's start with the first one. Knight moves over to f5. If knight moves to f5, then we can simply go on with a calculated risk with bishop takes pawn with check. If bishop takes the pawn with check, rook takes, we can obtain the queen in the next move. If black chooses not to take with the rook and choose to take with the king instead, then we can go on with queen to b3 check, king goes to e8, then queen to b5 check. Bishop blocks, now we can take the bishop back. We just considered king going over to e8. What if the king runs to safety to another square like this? Then we can unleash knight to e5 check, which enables this king takes that bishop. Knight to e4 check comes up. If king to h6, then we can play a nice move, queen to h3 check. If knight blocks, queen takes the knight on h4 is checkmate. We are back to this position after bishop moves to g5, inflicting pressure on this knight, where the rook and the bishop attack the knight and threaten to pick up material. We just saw where knight moves over to f5 to support in defense and how it went wrong for black. Well, why not let's look at another approach if the rook moves to support and defend the knight? Well, we can say knight is captured by the rook first. The rook takes, we can now involve knight to d5. If knight to f5, then in this position, we can play knight takes with check. Bishop takes, queen takes the queen, bishop takes, and bishop takes the bishop on d8. This gives white an extra piece advantage in this particular variation. We just looked at where rook moved over to e8 to support in defense. Do you know it's possible also not to take with rook instantly? Instead of taking the knight, we can just unleash a pressure move with knight to d5 instead. If knight goes to e4, then knight takes, bishop takes, we take with the rook. Then we can have extra material from this position. Even if bishop takes the bishop, it's possible to go with this. This rook is now pinned. So, rook takes the queen, then we take the bishop. If we count materials here, white is leading in material advantage. We are back to the move 4, bishop to c4. In this case, we have considered many options which involve moving the bishop out to this square with check, putting the bishop on c5, and so many others. Now we want to consider knight to f6 and check out the variation with knight to f6. This enables us to unleash e5. This is an aggressive move, which in turn, where the knight moves to this square, the knight gets trapped. So let's say the knight goes to a different square where he helps the knight from c6 to attack the pawn in the center. In this position, we are going to assume we do not know what we are doing by castling our king to safety. Black will go ahead to pick up the pawn. Just take the knight. Black would also take, thinking everything is fine. He'll be shocked where you hit him with rook to e1, pinning down this particular knight to the king. If d6, then we can unleash f4. These are minor variations and little variations you can try out on your own while playing the Scotch Gambit. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed any of this trap, kindly comment in the comment section below and show your satisfaction. If you want me to still cover more theory or more traps in other openings, feel free to drop it in the comment section. Thank you for watching and see you more videos on this channel. In these variations, I'm going to show you out lines that leads to winning that white has played in the past and you can explore in your own games. This game starts with pawn to e4, e5, and you know we are talking about the Scotch Gambit, so we have this base variation in move 3. Where pawn takes, here we unleash c3. Pawn takes on c3, we develop the bishop to c4. This is just a tweak to the variation of the Scotch Gambit. After knight to f6, attacking the pawn in the center. Here we can take the pawn on c3 and defend this pawn in the center. Here, if bishop to b4, trying to remove the defender of this pawn, and you should know that at this moment, this knight is pinned to the king. So, in this case, ideas like queen coming over to c2 can be established or applied, and secondly, other ideas like pawn to e5 can be established. Let's go with an aggressive pawn to e5. If knight goes to g4, we can do a bishop sacrifice by taking the pawn on f7 with check. If king takes, then knight to g5 check comes up. The queen cannot take the knight, so king has to move back to g8. Moving to g8 gives us room to play queen to d5 check. If king moves to f8, then we can make a checkmate. In this variation, we can also see that we have established the fourth move, bishop to c4, having access to attack the pawn on f7. Bishop to c5 comes up, c3. After knight to f6, b4. This case, we try using the flank to attack the black pieces. After bishop to b6 for safety, e5 comes up. Knight to e4, we now attack further. After pawn takes the pawn on c3, queen to d5 is simply crushing. In this case, we are going to win one of this piece, or we are going to make checkmate after taking the pawn on f7. So, a very good choice is for black to save the game by castling. However, black might choose to throw in a sneaky move, which is bishop takes pawn with check. After king to e2, the game is simply winning by white. Here, black will castle, then we can pick up one of those pieces, and this particular piece is still under attack. This is one of the rarest traps that is connected to the Scotch Gambit. After e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, d4, pawn takes on d4, we develop the bishop to c4. d6 followed. In this case, c3. Pawn takes on c3, knight takes on c3, bishop to g4, pinning down this knight to the queen. In this position, just castle the king out of the center to safety. If knight moves to e5, this position becomes a blunder because knight can simply take knight. If bishop takes the queen, thinking he has taken something free, we can unleash bishop takes the pawn on f7 with check. King moves to e7, knight to d5 is checkmate. We have come to the last trap I will show you in this segment. After e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, d4, pawn takes on d4, bishop to c4. If bishop to c5, here you can go with knight to j5. This is often overlooked because most of the times beginners think nothing can really happen by playing knight to g5. A lot can happen. If knight goes to h6 trying to defend against this particular threat, we can go with knight takes the pawn, knight takes, bishop takes, king takes. Can you see the remaining variation? Queen to h5 check is simply crushing. After g6, just pick up that bishop. And every of the problem was centered towards that f7, at least most of them. So, thank you for watching this video.